What happens when the CEO of a billion-dollar restaurant chain goes undercover as a janitor and discovers that his family's secret recipe has been stolen right before his eyes. None of the staff at Southern Bites that night had any idea that the quiet man sitting in the corner, wearing a faded baseball cap and simple black-rimmed glasses, was actually the founder of the billion-dollar sausage empire. He didn't walk in with the aura of a CEO, no entourage, no name tag or title. Instead, he simply opened the familiar wooden door of the Memphis branch, took a deep breath of the oak, smoked aroma that had once defined his childhood, a scent he thought he'd carry with him forever, and entered like any other customer. That man was Jackson Carter. It had been a long time since Jackson had visited any of the locations as a guest. Running over 200 restaurants across 12 states had turned him into a man of conference rooms, quarterly reports, and hectic private flights. But this visit was different. The plummeting numbers in the latest quarterly report, a nearly 20% drop in profits, and a 15% decline in customer satisfaction, sparked a deep unease inside him that numbers alone couldn't explain. It wasn't just a financial issue. It was something deeper, a crack in the soul of Southern Bites, and he knew he had to feel it for himself. He turned down the driver, avoided his advisors, and quietly headed to Memphis, the location that once set the standard for them all, to start looking for answers. As he walked into the restaurant, a young waitress greeted him with a polite smile, asked if he was dining alone, and led him to a table by the window. "I drove all day just to try your legendary smoked sausage." Jackson smiled, his voice soft and southern, a far cry from the commanding tone he used in boardrooms. He sat down and ordered the signature dish of Southern Bites, 2 smoked sausage links with mashed potatoes, pickled slaw, and cornbread. While waiting, he began to observe. The restaurant looked clean, but any seasoned eye could spot signs of neglect. A flickering bulb above the drink station, a cracked ceiling tile, dog-eared menus at the corners. None of these details would ever appear in a report, but to Jackson, they were alarm bells. He recalled what his grandmother used to say. "If you want to preserve the soul of a dish, even the light bulbs must shine." When the food arrived 20 minutes later, 5 minutes over the internal standard, Jackson studied the sausage closely. His eyes, sharp like a craftsman's blade, scanned the casing, which had the right stretch and color. The sliced meat showed even texture and perfect marbling. But as he took a bite, the memories from his childhood froze in place. Something was off. Subtle, but off. The smokiness was still there. The fennel stood out, but the spice hit too quickly, and the aftertaste faded too soon. It was a near-perfect replica, 95% identical, but it lacked the one thing only those raised on the original would notice, that delicate, smoky heat of chili pepper his grandmother had sworn him to guard. He tried another slice. The feeling persisted. It wasn't about technique. The recipe had been changed. A part of his family legacy had been tampered with. And he knew this was impossible, because only 5 people in the entire company had access to the original formula. Every branch received pre-mixed, sealed seasoning packs. So how could this have happened? Just as he placed his fork and knife down, before he could form a theory, he heard a voice from behind the service counter. "Honestly, this stuff is just cheap sausage. Splash a little smoke on it, and suddenly it's gourmet." A male voice, dripping with disdain. unaware that the man seated just a few feet away was the very creator of the dish he was mocking. Jackson didn't turn around, didn't react. He simply clenched the napkin under the table. Because in that moment, he realized this wasn't just about the food anymore. This was a battle for legacy, and it would start right here. Jackson Carter had heard hundreds of compliments and more than a few complaints about his food over 30 years of running Southern Bites. But never had a criticism struck him as deeply as the careless remark he had just heard. It wasn't the content that cut him. It was the tone. It was the disdain. The way someone casually mocked a dish another person had spent a lifetime perfecting. Jackson didn't turn around. He simply picked up his phone, pretending to scroll while keeping his ears wide open to every word being spoken at the service counter, where two young employees were laughing, completely unaware they were about to expose themselves. "Relax, Mia," the male voice sneered. "It's done. The recipe's gone, and my account's 20 grand heavier. Who's gonna know?" Jackson's chest tightened. Mia? His eyes flicked toward the waitress who had served him earlier, the one with the gentle smile, the sincere voice, the professional demeanor. He didn't want to believe it. But before he could deny it, her voice rang out, quieter, but unmistakably clear. "What if someone finds out? That's the original recipe, people will notice." "No, they won't," the guy, Ethan, replied, with a disturbing level of confidence. "Grilla's pride already tweaked it. Still tastes the same, just different enough to dodge legal trouble. And come on, the customers here couldn't tell the difference between gourmet sausage and gas station junk." At that point, Jackson could no longer remain composed. His hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. What he was hearing wasn't just petty theft, it was outright betrayal. His grandmother's sausage recipe, protected like a national secret, had been sold off. And it wasn't just two low-level employees. Ethan had mentioned another name, one that hit Jackson like a punch to the gut. Jacob Reynolds. Jacob, the COO, his right-hand man for 8 years. The one who had stood beside him at the grand opening of their 100th location. The one who had wrapped an arm around his shoulder at his grandmother's funeral and promised to protect the soul of her food just like she wanted. The godfather of Jackson's daughter. "Jacob's the one who gave up the recipe," Ethan said casually. "He's got access, and with all that gambling debt, that board seat at Grilla's Pride was just too sweet to pass up." In that moment, Jackson realized he wasn't just facing a minor breach of protocol. He was staring at an organized conspiracy, a full-scale theft of trade secrets, exploitation of company resources, and possibly a strategic takeover of Southern Bites from the inside. He also knew that if he reacted now, if he stood up and said a single word, that whole web would vanish like morning smoke from a smoker pit. No, he needed time. He needed proof. He needed to look deeper into the web that had silently woven itself into his company. And to do that, Jackson Carter, CEO of Southern Bites, would have to disappear. In his place, someone new would emerge. Larry Cooper, a drifter looking for work in the back kitchen. He took out his phone and texted his driver, "Wait another hour." Then he rose slowly and walked around to the back, quietly sitting at a table behind Mia and Ethan. No one noticed. No one knew that the man pretending to scroll on his phone was actually recording their entire confession, and in that moment, Jackson knew the battle had officially begun. Just as the first light of dawn broke and the morning sun had yet to dry the lingering raindrops on the Southern Bites sign at the Madison Avenue location, a man with a slight hunch, a worn-out jacket, and grease-stained shoes knocked on the back kitchen door. He introduced himself as Larry Cooper, a wandering laborer from Alabama with no permanent address and no flashy resume, only a crumpled work history and the eyes of someone begging for a chance. Ryan, the shift manager that morning, glanced up from behind his tablet, barely interested. "We're short in the back, floors and grill cleaning. Can you handle that?" Larry simply nodded. "I don't mind hard work. I just need a job." And just like that, without anyone suspecting a thing, the founder of Southern Bites, the man who once signed multi-million-dollar deals in glass-walled boardrooms, officially became the overlooked janitor in his own restaurant. The first day passed by in the scent of old smoke and the scraping sound of brooms. Jackson, now Larry, moved through each section he once believed he knew by heart. A freezer stocked with cheap cuts instead of premium ingredients, dusty shelves with mislabeled spice jars, an open box of cornbread batter barely covered by an oily rag. But what concerned him most wasn't the supplies. It was in people's eyes. The apathy, the carelessness, the dragging feet, the half-hearted laughs, and the cold glances exchanged between shifts all formed a heavy atmosphere, one completely detached from the pride he had once instilled, pride in every single sausage link. Jackson didn't just observe with his eyes. He listened with his heart. He heard Ethan, the same man who had bragged about selling the recipe, scold a new hire for asking, "Why do the sausages look so pale today?" He watched Ryan show up late, reeking of cheap cologne mixed with last night's liquor, yet still sharp enough to shoot him a mocking glance and say, "You mop like my grandpa." Jackson didn't react. He simply smiled faintly and kept scrubbing, knowing that every insult was another piece of the puzzle he needed for his final report. And yet, amidst the ashes, he found a flicker of light. One evening, while resting near the dumpster behind the kitchen, Mia, the server from that first night, quietly brought out 2 cups of hot tea. She didn't meet his eyes. She simply placed the cup beside him and said softly, "You looked like you could use this." He took the tea, nodding in gratitude. The two sat in silence as the night breeze swept through the stacked delivery crates. After a few minutes, Mia suddenly asked, her voice no longer sharp, "You ever work a kitchen before?" Jackson nodded. "Long time ago." She stared into the distance. "Then you probably know. Sometimes we stay because we love it, and sometimes because we got nowhere else to go." Jackson didn't reply. He simply rested his hand on the cup as the warmth seeped into his fingers, a gentle reminder that beneath the rot still lived people who weren't broken. They were just tired. That night, before leaving the kitchen, he stood alone in front of the sausage smoker, now replaced with a fast-burning unit. The unfamiliar sharpness of its smoke made him close his eyes. In his memory, he still heard oak wood crackling, still saw his grandmother's small hands tying each sausage with thick rope, still heard the line of customers waiting outside for a taste of something real. Jackson Carter had built Southern Bites on that flavor, on that love. and now he was willing to start all over again if he had to, just to reclaim what had been stolen. Jackson Carter, or rather Larry Cooper, had been working at the Madison Avenue location for nearly 2 weeks. In that time, he had scrubbed every meat tray, cleaned every corner of the kitchen floor, endured dozens of crude jokes from Ethan, and witnessed countless small actions that revealed how decay was silently eating away at the soul of Southern bites. But what troubled him more than the overcooked sausage links or the mislabeled spice bags was the silence. The silence of people who had grown used to a system where speaking up was no longer an option. Mia was the clearest example. She didn't talk much, didn't joke around, and never joined in on the back mockery of the managers. But she did more than anyone else. She knew every recipe, remembered regular customers' preferences, and occasionally, when she thought no one noticed, quietly swapped out a burnt sausage link for a better one, or cleaned up messes left by others. Jackson began watching her more closely, not with suspicion as he had at first, but with the curiosity of someone trying to understand how she had managed to hold on to something that resembled professional conscience in such a hostile environment. That afternoon, after a chaotic lunch shift where the kitchen printer jammed and more than half the sausages were burned, Jackson found Mia alone at the sink, scrubbing a stainless steel tray with such intensity it seemed she was wringing her frustration into the grease. He approached and asked gently, "You okay?" She didn't look up. "I'm fine," she said, though her hands clenched the sponge tightly. He handed her another tray and quietly began washing beside her. At the end of the shift, as they stepped out back to rest, Mia leaned against the old brick wall, her eyes staring into the distance. "You know," she said, "this place used to be different. When I started, we used real oak wood to smoke the sausage. The smell used to drift all the way out to the parking lot. People driving by would turn around just to grab a couple links. Now," her voice trailed off, "now someone decided flavor doesn't matter as much as speed. They cut the smoking, cut the drying process. It's all just fast, cook and quick, wrap now." Jackson said nothing. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he couldn't bear to interrupt her, one of the few who still remembered what real flavor used to be. She added that she had been removed from the morning prep team for pushing back when they changed the spice blend. "I'm not mad," she laughed, but the sound had something hollow in it. "Electric bills don't wait." That night, while organizing the spice inventory, Jackson and Mia reviewed the weekly supply sheet together. She pointed at one line. "See this? Says we received 30 packets of traditional spice blend, but I counted 3 times. Only 15 are the real deal. The rest are fake." Jackson frowned. "Did you report it?" Mia shrugged, a bitter smile forming. "Report to who? Ryan's the one doing the ordering." And just like that, Jackson added another critical piece to the puzzle. Not just about the stolen recipe, but about the system built to conceal the fraud. Later that night, Jackson returned alone to the prep area, using the excuse of having forgotten to clean a knife. Under dim lights, he quietly took photos of the mislabeled spice bags, scanned the QR codes, and sent them to Diana, the head of security. Less than 10 minutes later, her message came back. "Codes altered, not from an authorized supplier." Jackson's heart pounded. He now saw the entire picture beginning to form. And he knew, without a doubt, that this game had entered its most dangerous stage yet. The next morning, Jackson arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. The sun had yet to rise, and the air in the kitchen was still thick with the stale smell of smoke and grease lingering from the previous shift. But he wasn't concerned with the scent anymore. Today he hadn't come to scrub floors or clean sinks. He came to set a trap designed specifically for those who thought they could outsmart him, steal a family recipe, betray his trust, and destroy something he and his grandmother had spent a lifetime building. Last night, after confirming that the QR codes had been tampered with, Jackson called Diana Chin, the head of security and a former FBI agent, with a simple but loaded request. I need a version of the legacy blend recipe that's been altered. Looks the same, but with a few changed ingredients to track. Deliver it within 36 hours. Diana asked nothing more. She simply replied, "Understood. It'll be ready." And right on time, the decoy recipe was uploaded into the system, stored in an internal research folder labeled R&D Testing Confidential. That morning, Jackson, as Larry, deliberately accessed that folder from the kitchen computer to accidentally leave a digital footprint. He printed the recipe, placed it into an envelope with an internal company seal, and left it on the prep table during shift change when everything was chaotic and no one noticed a janitor fumbling with a mop. In less than 15 minutes, when he returned with an excuse about fixing the floor scrubber, the envelope was gone. Jackson said nothing. He didn't need to. All he had to do now was wait. A few hours later, as things returned to their daily rhythm, Mia quietly approached him during the lunch break. She looked around, then whispered, "Did you see anyone using the employee computer?" Jackson looked up. "Why?" She leaned closer, voice lowered even more. "I noticed a log entry. Someone accessed an admin-level folder from that kitchen terminal. That computer isn't supposed to reach company folders like that." Jackson furrowed his brow, feigning surprise. "Any idea who it was?" Maya hesitated, then said, "Ethan. I saw him on it this morning. Said Ryan told him to check something." Jackson wrote it down in his notebook, not missing a single word. Exactly 2 days later, Jackson heard what he'd been waiting for. During the lunch break, 2 new employees were chatting at the back table. "Hey, did you hear? Grilla's Pride is launching a new sausage, Gold Standard. Supposed to be top-tier spices, limited release." The other perked up, grinning. "Yeah, my cousin works over there. Said it drops Friday. So good their R&D guys called it Southern Heritage Blend." Gold Standard. That name had never leaked outside. It was the name Jacob, Jackson's own right hand, had proposed in a strategic meeting 6 months ago. And now it was being used as the branding for a competitor. That night, Jackson called Diana, voice firm and focused. "I want the full access logs for the last 48 hours. Focus on the Memphis branch terminal, especially any access to the R&D folder and outbound traffic to IPs linked to Grilla's Pride." 2 hours later, Diana responded, "Got it." The file was downloaded using Ryan's login credentials and forwarded through a commercial IP registered in another state. Matches the marketing office of Grilla's Pride. Jackson nodded in the dark, seated in a plain motel room, hand clenched tightly around his notebook. They had taken the bait. They were so greedy they hadn't even verified the authenticity of the recipe. And now he didn't just have evidence. He had a digital trail that could expose the entire chain from the restaurant branch to the boardroom. But Jackson wasn't ready to act just yet. One target remained. One key figure hadn't shown their face. And he knew, with just a little more time, the last mask would drop on its own. Jackson Carter knew better than anyone that in every act of betrayal there is always a front man, and someone lurking behind the curtain, pulling the strings. In the case of the stolen legendary sausage recipe from Southern Bites, Jacob Reynolds, the COO and Jackson's closest friend, was that name. But to accuse Jacob before the board and the law, Jackson needed irrefutable proof, a moment of reckoning so undeniable that even Jacob couldn't talk his way out of it. And he knew one thing: traitors become most careless when they think they're safe. Time was running out. Jackson continued working as usual, scraping his knees on the kitchen floor and listening to every whisper between shifts. He was cautious and silent, but his mind was razor sharp. Then came the opportunity on a grey, rainy afternoon when Ethan stepped outside the restaurant to take a phone call. Jackson quietly positioned himself behind the oil canisters near the delivery door. In that damp space, he heard exactly what he needed. Yeah, he totally bought it. That fake recipe, he thinks it's the real deal. Jacob already sent it to the marketing team. They're launching the nationwide campaign. Billboards, packaging, and everything. A brief pause, then Ethan's voice dropped, sly and smug. No, I'm not worried. That Larry guy, he's just some old janitor. Can't even find the mop bucket half the time. If he figures it out, I'll become a gourmet chef. Jackson didn't move. He let every word soak into his memory, a final piece in his collection of evidence. They had stolen the decoy recipe, had trusted in a hole in the system, and now they were certain they'd won. But that arrogance would be their downfall. The next morning, the restaurant was unusually quiet. Rain tapped against the windows, and the usual kitchen noise softened, as if warning that something was about to shift. At exactly 10:47 a.m., the door chime rang. A tall woman entered, dressed in a charcoal grey suit, walking with purpose, her eyes scanning every corner of the restaurant. No one recognized her, but Jackson did. It was Diana Chin. She said little, ordered 2 sausage meals to go, paid in cash, and sat quietly in the corner. 5 minutes later, the door opened again. This time it was Jacob, wearing a luxury trench coat, polished shoes, and that same cold expression that once intimidated dozens of executives. "Is Ryan here?" he asked the front staff. "Tell him someone from the board is stopping by." Mia, standing at the register, glanced toward the kitchen. When her eyes met Jackson's, he gave a small nod. She understood. Originally, the reveal was planned for later, when the place had emptied out. But sometimes, the moment comes to you. And Jackson knew this was it. He stepped out from the kitchen. No more hunched posture, no dragging feet, no looking down. He stood tall, eyes sharp, his voice cutting through the silence like a bell in a storm. "Jacob." The man turned, his expression shifting from confusion to pale shock. "Jackson? You?" The whole room froze. A cook dropped a metal tray. No one spoke. "You didn't expect to see me here, did you?" Jackson said, slowly removing his apron and placing it on the counter. "You thought you were safe. But over the past 2 weeks, I've been recording, collecting, and tracking every trace you all left behind." Jacob opened his mouth, ready to respond, but Jackson raised a hand to stop him. I have everything. System access logs, photos of Grilla's Pride packaging, using the decoy recipe I planted, digital traces from Ryan's account, audio of Ethan bragging, and most importantly, I have the truth. Ryan emerged from the office, stunned, just as Diana pulled out a thick file. Jackson turned to him, voice firm. This location is being shut down for audit effective immediately. You and Ethan are fired. As for Jacob, you'll explain yourself before the full board. The lawyers are already waiting. No one spoke. No one moved. Because there was nothing left to question. Jackson looked at Mia, his expression softening. You didn't just do your job. You preserved what little was left of this place. I'll speak with you soon. And then, in complete silence, Jackson Carter stepped out of the janitor's uniform and reclaimed his role as the guardian of his legacy. In his hands, the truth had come to light, and the storm had finally passed. 3 days after the explosive expose at the Madison Avenue branch, Jackson Carter walked into the Southern Bites boardroom, not with the rigid expression of a CEO managing a crisis, but with the face of a father, a grandson, and a guardian returning to reclaim what belonged to his family. On the large screen behind him, 2 images appeared side by side. One was the original spice recipe, handwritten in his grandmother's script. The other was the altered version, the one Grilla's Pride was preparing to launch under the name Gold Standard. No one in the room spoke. There was no need for applause, no words of encouragement. Truth, when powerful enough, speaks for itself. Jackson turned off the projector, closed his laptop, and let his gaze pass quietly over the familiar faces around the table. Then he said, "We are not here to punish a few traitors. We are here to seal the cracks that allowed betrayal to seep in." That statement was more than just the opening of a meeting. It was the beginning of a reconstruction, unlike anything in Southern Bites history. First came a system-wide audit. Not just a financial review, but a complete overhaul of every department, from training and sourcing ingredients to quality control and internal communication. Outdated processes were re-examined layer by layer, and the weak spots that had been exploited were clearly mapped out. Jackson understood that culture does not erode overnight. It fades slowly, with every let it go, with every time someone chooses to look away. And to rebuild that culture, he had to start with those on the front lines. So he launched a profit-sharing program for kitchen staff, those who had always been treated as behind the scenes. Every employee would receive a clear bonus based on service quality, customer feedback, and participation in professional training sessions. At the same time, a confidential hotline was established, connecting directly to headquarters, allowing any misconduct to be reported without fear of retaliation. No more whispered complaints in the kitchen. No more fear of being reassigned for talking too much. But the biggest change came in what had made Southern Bites famous from the start: the sausage. The original recipe was restored, and for the first time in company history, Jackson decided to give it a new name, not just to protect it, but to declare it: Heritage Flame. This was not merely a product name. It was a story. A way to remind people that behind every sausage link were hundreds of hours spent beside a fire, the slender hands of a Southern woman tying each link with coarse twine, and years of overcoming prejudice, hardship, and poverty to preserve a flavor. Jackson did not delegate this to the marketing team. He personally oversaw every spice packet, every smokehouse batch, every prototype shipment. Anyone who suggested shortening the smoking time to boost output was immediately denied. "This is not a product," he said. "It is a promise." News of Heritage Flame spread faster than any PR campaign. Old customers who had once walked away now returned out of curiosity. New customers came for the story. Food bloggers began comparing the new taste to old memories, and to their surprise, the two were indistinguishable. But for Jackson, success was not in the rising revenue charts. It was in a quiet morning at the same Madison Avenue branch, where he walked into the back kitchen and saw everything brighter, cleaner, and at the center stood Mia. She was teaching 3 new staff members how to hand-tie sausage links, a skill no one at the branch had practiced in nearly a year. Jackson didn't step in. He simply stood in the corner, watching her smile, instruct and demonstrate, her eyes no longer distant. After the shift, he called her over. "Have you ever considered becoming a manager?" Mia raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering?" Jackson smiled and shook his head. "I'm launching a mentorship program for management, and I want you to be the first to join." Mia said nothing. She just looked at him for a long moment, eyes glistening with emotion. Finally, she exhaled softly. "What took you so long to ask?" Jackson chuckled. "I was busy mopping floors." And in that small joke lay the entire journey he had quietly walked, in search of something far more valuable than numbers or accolades, the belief that a properly made dish could heal not only the palate, but the spirit of an entire team. On a Friday afternoon, as the last rays of sunlight stretched across the roof of a modest home in the Mississippi countryside, Jackson Carter stood before his grandmother's old kitchen, the very first headquarters of Southern Bites. This humble wooden house, once just big enough for a single table, a makeshift smoker, and a spice rack stained by time, remained untouched, like a sacred place no one dared alter. Before there were signs, menus, or balance sheets, everything began right here. And Jackson knew that to truly close this chapter, he had to return to the starting point, not to seek answers, but to remember what he had nearly forgotten. The kitchen still held a faint scent of oakwood smoke, mixed with the damp, musty air clinging to the brick walls that hadn't been painted in years. Jackson walked slowly, letting his hand brush against the worn items. An old cast-iron skillet, a chipped wooden ladle, and the coarse cloth his grandmother used to wipe her hands after every sausage batch. In the corner, he spotted a small wooden box she always guarded, not for its monetary value, but because inside were handwritten notes, recipes, tricks, and reminders never included in any training manual. As he opened the box, a wave of black pepper, clove, and garlic powder filled the air, a scent that had followed him since childhood. Jackson turned each fragile page, rereading her slanted handwriting. "Never smoke sausage in the rain. Moist smoke dulls the flavor." Or, "Let the meat rest 8 hours after stuffing for full aroma." But it was the final line that brought him still. Written in red ink on the back of an old grocery receipt, it read, "You can't mass produce pride." He read it aloud, letting the words sink deep into his bones. And in that moment, he understood. The recipe wasn't the issue. What had been stolen wasn't the spice or the dill. It was the spirit, the care behind every step, the patience when no one is watching, the commitment to quality even when it takes longer. They, Jacob, Ethan, Ryan, had not just betrayed the company. They had betrayed something that could never be measured in dollars, the integrity of the craft. And Jackson knew that if he hadn't returned to this place, he might have forgotten too. Anger, strategy, and the whirlwind of responsibility had nearly pulled him away from his roots. But here, in this quiet room, he saw it clearer than ever. Legacy doesn't live in vaults or servers. It lives in how people carry out the smallest tasks, even when no one acknowledges them. As dusk settled, Jackson placed the wooden box back in its spot, gently straightening a framed photo of his grandmother's hands, tying sausage links with red twine. Then he stepped outside, inhaling deeply. The southern wind still carried the scent of oak smoke and damp earth. Things no one could replicate. Things only felt when the heart is truly invested. Tomorrow, he would return to the office, not to calculate damages, but to pass on what he had just rediscovered. A system can run on software and KPIs. But a brand, a soul, only lives when someone is there to protect it. And he knew, from this moment forward, Southern Bites would no longer be a company of contracts. It would be a place of standards, of pride, of a legacy reawakened once more. And this time, he wouldn't let it fade. Even if it meant scrubbing every kitchen floor by hand, he would keep the fire burning. Because fire isn't meant to light up profit. It's meant to warm belief. 1 week after Jackson Carter officially returned to the Southern Bites headquarters, the Madison Avenue branch reopened with a new team in place. But this time, the most remarkable thing wasn't the new manager or the improved portions. It was the atmosphere. Everything felt lighter, brighter, more alive. And the first person to step out from the kitchen, wearing a crisp new uniform shirt, with a natural smile and confident stride, was Mia Alvarez, no longer the quiet waitress she once was, but now officially appointed as the new Regional Training Coordination Assistant. Jackson didn't hold a press conference. No banners were hung, no press releases issued. Instead, he did things the way his grandmother always had, quietly, firmly, present when needed, and always watching from a distance. But this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him was a new team, built from front-line workers like Mia, people who understood that what keeps customers coming back isn't gimmicks, but the respect embedded in the smallest details. Heritage Flame, the sausage line revived from the original recipe, was officially launched across the system. But unlike typical product rollouts, this one wasn't led by slogans. It was led by a story. A short video was released on social media, just over 2 minutes long, beginning with the image of a tiny kitchen and a pair of aging hands tying sausage links, not showing a face, no flashy edits, just the warm voice of Jackson narrating, "Sometimes the most valuable thing isn't in the recipe, it's in how you treat it." The video spread like wildfire, not because of viral tactics, but because it touched on something simple that everyone craves: authenticity. People came to Southern Bites not just to eat, but to remember the feeling of someone placing a plate in front of you with genuine care, not for tips, not for KPIs, but because they believed it was the right thing to do. Independent food bloggers began posting comparison shots between the old sausage and the heritage flame. They didn't just compliment the flavor, they spoke of the emotion. One wrote, "For the first time in years, I felt like I was eating in my mother's kitchen." A 73-year-old woman left a comment under one post. "I don't eat much anymore, but this sausage made me cry. Not because it's spicy, but because it made me miss my late husband." To Jackson, those words were worth more than any growth chart. He no longer tracked weekly revenue bars like before. What he watched most closely now were internal assessments, service quality, team morale, customer feedback. Because he knew, if the culture is healed, the numbers will follow on their own. One Monday morning, Jackson returned to the Madison branch unannounced. He circled the kitchen and saw the smoker running on schedule, new hires learning how to tie sausage links directly from Mia. The kitchen was quiet in a comforting way. No shouting, no tension in the rhythm. Everyone had their role, moving in harmony, like the background music of a culinary symphony. Mia saw him, nodded slightly, then continued her work. She didn't need to say thank you, because they both knew when trust is returned to where it belongs, the truest form of gratitude is in action. That evening, Jackson received a voice message from Mia's mother, who lived in another state. Her voice trembled. "I just want to thank you. My daughter doesn't come home silent anymore. She talks about teaching the new staff how to tie sausage, about the smell of smoke, and about a boss who listened to what others called trouble." Jackson saved that message. Not to boast, but to remind himself, what he had just done wasn't about saving a company. It was about saving a legacy, a system, a spirit, a way of working that he had almost allowed others to tarnish. And now, what mattered most had returned, not just in flavor, but in the eyes of the people behind the scenes. The belief that they were helping preserve something greater than money. That was pride. One autumn afternoon, as the golden rays of sunset streamed through the kitchen window at Southern Bites' headquarters, Carter sat quietly in the small office behind the product testing area. In front of him was a plate of sausage prepared for the final tasting of Heritage Flame. Not the temporary version used to bait the thieves, not the one diluted with deceit, but a complete version, restored, verified, and cooked according to the very principles his grandmother once laid down. In that hushed space, he studied the glistening oil tracing the perfect reddish-brown casing, gently flipped a slice, and listened for the signature snap, the sound of casing smoked with just the right fire. He took a bite. The subtle heat of cayenne blended with the rich sweetness of handcrafted meat, leaving behind a lingering depth of oakwood smoke. No one spoke, but one member of the R&D team nodded, eyes misty. "It's back," she whispered. That weekend, Southern Bites hosted a private tasting, no press, no fanfare. Just a gathering for long-time loyal customers, the ones who once wrote letters and sent emails, lamenting that the flavor was no longer the same. Midway through the event, an elderly woman stood, raised her hand, and said, "I never thought sausage could make me cry. But the first bite I had today took me back to a Sunday morning in 1985, when my husband was still alive, and we sat together on the back porch for breakfast." The room fell silent. Then came the applause, not because the sausage tasted good, but because it had brought something back. Memory, kindness, and the feeling of belonging. For Jackson, that moment transcended all metrics. He knew then Southern Bites was no longer just a restaurant chain. It had become a symbol. From that point forward, a new principle was established, not from a boardroom, but from Jackson's own voice during a senior leadership meeting. From today on, any decision that affects our product, our people, or our customers must answer 3 questions. 1. Does this respect our legacy? 2. If my grandmother were alive, would she nod in approval? And 3. Are we doing this for profit or for pride? No one objected. No one needed clarification. Jackson then introduced a small booklet printed on humble paper called the Flame Handbook. It compiled his grandmother's old notes, advice on selecting meat, maintaining the smoke fire. It's like, even when no one is watching, your kitchen dresser should be as clean as when it's inspected. The handbook was given to every new employee, not as a manual, but as a guiding light. A month later, Jackson returned to the Madison Avenue branch. The kitchen was spotless, the lighting warm, and the menu had been carefully revised, not overloaded with items, but focused on the core dishes that built their name. Mia, now the regional training lead, was supervising an internal workshop. She spotted him, smiled, and pointed to the handbook tucked into her chest pocket. "I always carry it," she said. He nodded, offering no words. On the way home, sitting in the car, Jackson looked out through the fogged window, where the Southern Bites signs continued to glow. He knew then the storms had passed, and what remained was not ruin, but a new standard. A benchmark that could not be cheated, a legacy that could not be sold, a way of craftsmanship that only survived when people still led with their hearts. Because in the end, the most valuable thing Jackson Carter left behind at Southern Bites wasn't a sausage recipe, not revenue, not even a network of branches. It was a single phrase that had lived with him through the entire journey, written in red ink on the back of an old receipt. You can't mass produce pride. And now, that has become the compass for an entire generation to follow. A dish no longer just food, but a testament to a way of living. A legacy that burns on. A flame that will never go out. In the business world, where the formula for success is often measured by numbers and profit, Jackson Carter reminded us that the true core value does not lie in the secret blend of spices, but in how one protects it. Kindness, professional pride, and a culture of integrity are things money cannot buy, and once lost, they are incredibly difficult to restore. A legacy is not something stored in a safe, but the quiet actions repeated day after day, even when no one is watching. If this story touched something deep within you about betrayal, trust, and renewal, please like the video, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another inspiring story. And don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase, "Keep the flame." If you too believe that what builds a brand is not just the product, but the spirit behind it.